I have a toxic habit. So I have this thing where I know you are not supposed to try something new prior to race day, but I did my speed workout in the shoes that I thought I was going to wear. I felt terrible. So what did I do? I got on Google. I started reading every review about every possible marathon shoe, and I ordered 5 pairs, and I'm going to try them all on, and I'm going to hit my last long run with some marathon goal pace in them, and then my final like tune-up Tuesday in whichever pair I decide. I did the exact same thing for the Ultra. I even took 2 pairs out to the Ultra last April, and I literally did not make the decision of which shoe I was wearing until 4 a.m. the morning I woke up, and I just went with my gut instinct. You guys, this is not good advice, but for some reason it works for me, and I like to explore all my options.
Welcome back to the IBEX Training podcast. My name is Patrick, and I'm here with my beautiful wife, Kristi. We're 8 days out from Kristi trying to break a 3-hour marathon in Mesa. And today we're going to talk about what the training looks like leading up to this race in comparison to competing at the CrossFit Games, what it feels like prepping and preparing, and the differences between the two, and hopefully give you guys some valuable insights that you can put into your training. Kristi's run 241 miles this month. How are you feeling after all of those miles?
I feel really good after all the miles. It's just the taper. And so for those of you guys that don't know, taper is that rest period where it's absolutely necessary to do before your race or your comp. Like, you've done all this work. So I've done 240 miles of work. Now I have to pull back. That's actually the harder part. Something
that applies to a lot more than just training is you'll hear to appreciate and enjoy the journey. And the training, something that you enjoy. And the closer we get, it seems to be a little bit more stressful. You get a little bit more kind of dialed in, and you've kind of got the looming feeling of, something big that's coming. And you very much do enjoy the training. So the taper is not something that is kind of the more natural aspect for you. So going from a high volume of training where you honestly feel good, how are you feeling this week where we start pulling back the volume and, you're in the midst of a taper now?
To be honest, I had my worst workout this week. So I had my last really hard speed workout, and I came home and I looked at, I was like, I don't know what's going on, but I feel terrible. And that's pretty much spot on for how I've been my entire career with anything that I've done, whether it was swimming for Louisville, competing at the CrossFit Games, or now racing, even into the High Rocks races that we did. It's like, I think it becomes a psychological warfare within your mind, because you've been doing all this work and you feel so good. So you just want to feel good. And all of a sudden you become so aware of everything else happening. And it's like, oh, my foot hurts. Oh, my ankle hurts. Oh, my legs feel heavy. But it's like, that stuff probably was there. You just weren't as aware. And so for me, I feel, to be honest, like crap. And I just keep coming back to, all of a sudden when I had that terrible speed workout, I came home and I told you, and it's like I start doubting everything. And I start thinking, well, what if I would have done this? What if I could have done this? I should have done this. And then I had to snap myself out of it, and you helped me with that. But it was more of like, hey, focusing on that stuff does not do any good, but adds more stress. Now it's wearing you out, and you're wasting all this energy you should be using to recover, because now you're adding all this undue stress. And these are things you can't control. So stop focusing on the things you can't control. And that was something I worked so hard on during the CrossFit Games, is only focusing on the controllables, because if it's out of your control, it's just wasted energy and effort.
I think there's 2 different types of athletes. Some do really well with the taper and they feel great. You would not be in that camp. You tend to not feel very good when we pull the volume back prior to a competition. And I think it's really good to have an external source or a resource where somebody can kind of tell you, like, hey, this is normal. We've experienced this every competition you've done, and it probably means we're, just right about on track. Because sometimes that can be a little bit harder to recognize when it's you and you're not feeling great, and you notice your heart rate's going up and you're not sleeping maybe even quite as well. And that would be the opposite of what you'd expect when you pull the volume back, but it's just it's part of it.
Yes, I'm experiencing all of those things, and it is part of it. And that's where I'm thankful for you. And I'm thankful that you've been able to help me recognize that over the years. And I think also spending some time journaling, and then spending some time looking back at the data, looking back at the workouts that you've done, look at the concrete evidence that you are ready. And so that's what I did the other day. It's like, I've looked at everything that I've done, and it's like, oh my gosh, like, why am I doubting myself? Yes, it's good to go in nervous. Like, nerves can be used to your advantage. And when I'm not nervous, usually that's a problem. That usually means I don't care. And it's like, gosh, look at all these miles that I showed up for, all these workouts in the gym when, I didn't feel like it those days. And that's what we talk about, falling in love with the process and the journey, is when I pull the curtain back and I look at how much time, how many months I've spent building for this, and how many, just in this month, I ran 240 plus miles. I'm running a 26-mile race. So it's 99% of the work is the training. And so I think for a lot of people, it's like we look forward to these race days, but if we can learn to kind of shift that mindset and shift the framework of, now we get to see how prepared we are. Like if I studied for this test, what grade did I receive, or things along those lines. And I think that pulling back that curtain and just recognizing like, hey, find joy in the process and the journey. And that ultimately will help you show up your best because you found joy and you showed up every single day. And that will help you put your best foot forward on race day. If you didn't prepare, you're not going to get the result. And I think that's something I keep reminding myself. So for me, it's helpful to go back and look at the concrete evidence and the data and just be like, okay, you did the work. Let's see how it goes. Anything can happen in a marathon. Anything can happen on a race. Like we don't get to choose the days that we feel good, but what we can do is focus on our mindset, and we can focus on not, hindering ourselves by having all these negative thoughts on things that you can't control.
This is the longest marathon build that you have done for as long as I've known you. Typically, you've had other competitions, and CrossFit's kind of been more of a priority in marathons, or half marathons have been kind of squeezed in off seasons or after the games, things like that. Not competing in CrossFit anymore. You've got the ability to make a full marathon build. How's that felt in comparison, putting so many miles, weeks, and even months building up to this?
It's been interesting, fun, and rewarding because it's something that I've never done. So I remember hitting my first 100-mile month, and that really wasn't too long ago, within the last year, and I was so excited. And then that slowly goes up to maybe 120-mile month. And you do these really slow builds, like these 10% at most increases. You don't want to be increasing a lot. And the last marathon I ran was over 2 years ago. And I tried to run another one, and I didn't do a proper build, and I ended up getting injured because I just tried to jump right into it. So it's learning to be patient, and that's where the rewarding part comes in. Is it's like, wow, if you can actually just be patient and focus on the end goal and like each individual day to get you to that end goal and not try to skip steps, it can be so rewarding. And so I think this has been extremely rewarding, and I'm just interested and I'm excited to see how it goes. And if it doesn't go well, it's not that I failed. Well, I did not hit my mark, but I'll try again. And I think it's just layering brick on brick. And we talk about that all the time, whether it's consistency in fitness or how you do your nutrition. And so it's been a really interesting process and journey. And I've kept strength in, and that's a big question a lot of people have asked. It's like, well, are you even strength training? Yeah, I strength train a minimum of 3 days a week, always. I strength train 3 times this week, and this is the week before the marathon. So my strength training will look different, but I'm still strength training.
You are strength training, but the goal right now is not pushing your strength numbers. So you're still hitting lifts, you're still putting in volume, but you're not trying to push your strength numbers up at the same time. You're keeping strength in, but the running's the priority, and you can't push those numbers while you're at that kind of mileage, or at least with such a specific goal.
That's 100% true. And I think that's the piece that some people kind of miss and they get wrong is like, I'm maintaining the strength that I have. So we tested that 1 arm back squat right before I went into like the highest part of this build, just to see where my numbers were. We'll test it again after. We'll see, how much strength did I lose? How am I feeling? That way we have a really good comparison. What I'm looking at is the overall percentage. And so we talk about this often is like you can either go RPE. So some days that RPE is going to feel different than those percentages. They don't always match up, which is why we like RPE. For those of you guys who don't know, RPE is rate of perceived exertion. So I could be at a 6 out of a scale of 1 to 10. So it's going to be a moderate rate of perceived exertion, but I'm not destroying myself. I'm not waking up super sore or beating myself down. That would be similar to a 60-ish% lift out of 100%, whatever your max is. So the 60% is never going to change because your max is a concrete number, but that RPE based on how you're feeling that day could actually shift on a sliding scale. So I like to use a lot of RPEs when I'm doing this kind of stuff, is just being in tune with my body, thinking about, okay, the goal is not to get myself as strong as possible right now. It's just to maintain, to stay activated, and to feel strong for my running.
And we've leaned more and more into the RPE, and I think that it's super beneficial, and especially on like a day-to-day basis. I think we all know that feeling where you even just grab the barbells, and some days like you look twice at it, like, did this thing get 10 pounds heavier? And then other days you'll like go get the barbell out of the rack and it feels light as can be. And depending on how you slept, if your central nervous system's taxed, you might not be able to hit the same numbers. So the range that you're working at is still challenging, and that can be at 70% or that could be at 85%. And some days might even be lower. But the important thing is the challenge more so than the actual percentage, because that I think can fluctuate from day to day or week to week.
Yes. And like you said, we've shifted. I did all percentage work at the start of my CrossFit career, and that worked to an extent. But then learning to listen to your body, especially as you continue to get deeper into a sport or deeper into training, can be extremely beneficial. And this can go for running as well. And this is something we talked about, I think, on when we released that I was doing a sub 3 hour goal, is time-based runs versus distance. And that allowed me to pull back and focus on how am I feeling during those runs. And so sometimes it's just shifting that mindset. So if you're running and it's like, it's supposed to be an easy run, we don't want your perceived effort to be at a 9 or a 10. You need to ask yourself, like, what is my perceived effort right now? And it needs to be something easy. So it's that perceived effort scale could be used for running or for weightlifting.
Yeah, I think that's a really great analogy. And I think people understand that a little bit more with conditioning, whether that's running or any other form of conditioning, where if you're in zone 2, like there is a zone that you need to be in. It doesn't matter if one day your zone 2 was a 10-minute mile and the next day it's a 8:30 mile, you're still wanting to be in that zone 2 effort. That same thing can be applied for strength training, where your percentage or the weight that you're using can fluctuate from day to day or week to week, but the effort is what you're looking for, because that's really where you're going to be making the most progress.
And that's definitely something that we've applied here to this taper, and something that we've applied for the last few years when you compare it to how we train for the CrossFit Games. I think there's a big difference in the way that we tapered for the CrossFit Games versus the way that we're tapering now. And so this taper actually started 3 weeks out, which is, when I say 3 weeks out, I'm not in a full-blown taper, but volume started decreasing. Intensity was still there. For CrossFit Games 3 weeks out, I am still hammering. Volume is still very, very high, and we are not pulling back that curtain. We're not pulling back on anything at that point. That is like when we are full steam. So it's been interesting to see. It's like, okay, 3 weeks out, I'd already hit my last big peak week. Now we're starting to pull back 10% volume. Then we're starting to pull back another 10 to 15% volume. Then this final week, we're pulling back upwards of total 30 to 35% total volume from that peak week. And so that's just been a little bit of a mindset shift, starting that earlier and understanding those reps and those miles need to come down, but the intensity can still be there.
I know what my answer would be, but for you, which one is more stressful? Was it preparing to taper for the CrossFit Games, or tapering for the run you've got coming up, or the race you have?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I don't know. I mean, they're so different. They're different in many ways. And I think the CrossFit Games, I just had a lot more pressure on myself, undue pressure that I probably didn't even need to put onto myself. It's just like, this is for fun, and I just want to see what I can do. And the CrossFit Games is like, well, last year I took this place, so I'd like to, even though I'm not saying out loud that I want to take this place, but it's like, you don't really want to fall down on that leaderboard. You just want to continue to climb. So I think this is a little bit different, where this is more of an interpersonal goal, and not that was external. It's just all those factors. When you've been doing it year after year after year, you want to keep getting better. And I'm still pretty new into running these marathons. So I think tapering for the CrossFit Games was honestly a lot more stressful, and only because we had experienced years where we didn't get it right, where maybe we pulled back too early, and I was just coming off the floor. I'm like, Pat, I am so flat. Like I don't know what's going on. I don't feel strong and I feel flat. And that was like never a good feeling, especially when you have so many events and that starts happening early in the weekend.
It's crazy over the course of the years training with so many other games athletes. It's wild to see how differently, one, people just train in general, but then also how they either are peaking or tapering for the CrossFit Games. And the amount of volume that people feel comfortable doing and the type things that they're doing prior to competition is so wild. It is different across the board. And I think for us, there's just a lot more knowns going into a race where we've got a better grasp on what needs to happen. And there's just one thing that we're focusing on. For the CrossFit Games, there's so many elements and so many things that you need to be either prepared for, make sure that you've touched, things that might come up, last minute things that might get thrown in as a curveball. That for me, that was just so much more stressful. And from the outside perspective, I just felt a lot more weight going into the CrossFit Games. I'm so confident, and I know what you have done in your training. I know what you're capable of doing, and I feel very confident that you'll be able to apply those things come race day.
That's honestly such a great point. And I think I'm so glad you brought that up about all the different things that did make tapering for the CrossFit Games harder, because you also didn't know what you were tapering for. So like he's saying with this running, like we know I'm running 26.2 miles. We know that this course, I've already looked at the course profile, which we can talk about things that you should be looking at heading into your race so that you're prepared. But this course profile is a net downhill. So trying to make sure my quads are very strong because your quads actually take a very big beating on a net downhill. We don't have a lot of downhills. So then I can look, okay, the aid stations are every X amount of miles. I'm going to take my fueling I have it dialed in exactly what mile that I'm going to take it. You can plan ahead for all of these things. When you're training for the CrossFit Games, you cannot plan ahead for any of those things because half the time you don't even know the workouts. You don't know what time of day the workouts are going to be. You don't know if they're on site. You don't know what gear you're going to need for the workouts. It's literally all unknown. And that's training for the unknown and unknowable, I think is, one of the slogans for CrossFit. And that was what the games was. And so understanding am I going to be doing a heavy snatch or heavy clean and jerk? Which one should I be priming heading into that week? You really don't know. And so you're trying to prime anything that you can possibly think of. And honestly, kind of hoping and praying that you chose the right movements.
For this race, we know what time you start. We know how long it's going to take. You'll have a check-in, and that's more or less about it. For the CrossFit Games, you've got this briefing, this check-in. You've got to be here for registration. You've got to be here for this, athlete briefing, then the coaches briefing, then this event's over here, and this event's going to be at this spot. And it's just a weekend of unknowns where you're moving from one place to another, and you're always kind of on your toes, and you're not sure what you're going to need, how much food you're going to need for the day. Do I need to bring it? Do I need to bring it all? Do I need to be able to go back and get something? Do you need to be able to take it off site? There's just a lot of variables to just create a little bit more underlying stress. And here we can kind of plan the whole day out, the whole trip out, and it should be pretty calm. It's not that stressful.
I feel like you say it's not that stressful, but you get emotionally invested from a spectator. And I feel like I felt that so kind of rewinding, looking back at our career, Patrick was competing at regionals, but he always put his competition second to mine. He literally would go on the floor just to get a workout in and have a little fun because he got to do it. But then he was in the back helping me warm up, helping me prepare. And what happened is as those heats shifted, sometimes he would get a 5-minute window and he'd be in the back helping me. He'd be outside on the floor cheering me on, and then he'd be sprinting to the back to get into the corral to make his heat. So that was stressful for you in a different kind of way. And I feel like this is also stressful where it's so amazing to have such a great support system. And that I feel like I actually have the easier job. I've done the training, I just go out and run. And you have to sit there for, 3 hours and hope is she going to get under? I don't know, and it's out of your control. So I'd kind of love to hear you guys share with other people, because I only got that in a small glimmer when you did a competition about 2 years ago down in Kentucky. I got to go watch you, and it was a local competition, and I was a nervous wreck. I was so nervous and I couldn't control anything. And I'm this is what he's been going through all of these years. So I'd kind of love for you to share a little bit about that.
I also won that, just for the record too.
You did win, which was amazing.
No,
it came down to the last event, remember?
The CrossFit stuff is so much more stressful for me. And I am very much emotionally invested. And I think there's probably a lot of people that can relate to that. And I know what you're capable of, and I just want things to go well. And when it becomes out of my hands, or there are a lot of things out of my control, it just becomes more stressful, for sure. But I'm very confident the work that you put in. I know what you're capable of. You've been pretty close to a sub 3 hour marathon with far less training. And I think it's something that you were very capable of doing, and I'm excited to get to watch.
I hope everybody listening, if you are, depending on which side you are, if you are the athlete and you have an incredible support system, I hope you give them a big hug. Tell them how much you appreciate their support, because I tell you all the time. And I tell you all the time when I'm starting to come back to life, I feel like sometimes we're in the thick of training. It gets a little bit more challenging, even though I'm appreciative. And so if you are listening, just make sure you give your support system a little bit of love. And if you are the support system, just know that you are very much appreciated and valued. And that support goes so far, and that it really is a team effort.
Something else we've talked about, which I just think is interesting, and I think makes it a little bit more enjoyable for both of us, is the fact that the training it's a known thing. You're running, and we know how far you have to run. And for CrossFit, there are so many things that you have to be good at and be prepared for if they show up, that no matter how much training you want to do, there's only so much running you can do a day. Even if you ran a full marathon a day, which would be a horrible idea, that's 3 hours. When you're training for the CrossFit Games, it is literally a full day commitment. You've got strength training, long conditioning, short conditioning, gymnastics, skill work, recovery. It is such a big commitment, and there's so many things that you have to practice and be good at, that it becomes all you're doing and thinking about and focusing on. And with running, it's nice to not have so many things and not spend the entire day training, be able to have a life and a business outside.
Yeah, I think that is definitely something that we've kind of picked up on. And that, running a sub 3 hour marathon is a 6:52 pace. So people are probably not doing that every single day unless they're some rock star. But the point is like, you can break those runs up too. Like there's a lot of people who, maybe they run 100 miles a week. They might do 10 in the morning and 5 in the evening. 10 in the morning might take them, if they're running a 8-minute mile, an hour and 20 minutes. 5 in the evening might take them another 45 minutes, depending on their pacing. And so that's still around that 2-hour total time domain. And that's 15 miles in that day. And they're not doing that every single day. And so it is nice. It's nice knowing that, especially if you have those easy runs, when you wake up early in the morning, like I love to go out first thing. I love to just have that moment of quietness where I'm not looking at my phone. I don't wear headphones. I don't listen to anything. I just go out and I'm just sit with my own thoughts. And it's 60 to 75 minutes and then I'm done. And then I'm showered and I'm right back to work. And that is just something very, very different than I ever experienced with CrossFit. There was like huge, do I have all the gear that I need to get to the gym? Then I have to do all of the warm up and activation to get me ready for these lifts. Then I have to get the weights up, the weights back. There's just so much that goes into it that those sessions were, a lot of times 2 to 3 hours, but it wasn't 2 to 3 hours of work. There's just so much transition time that you have to build in. And then you're doing that 2 to up to 3 times a day sometimes. I remember there were times where I would train in the morning from 10:30 to 12:30 and train again from 1:30 to 3:30. And then I'd go hit the track at 6 or 7 o'clock at night for that third session. Or I'd come back if you were coaching on ramp and I'd be doing my monostructural. So it's just the amount of training that went into prepping for that CrossFit Games is just, it's not sustainable for a lifestyle. And that was all that I had time for. That was all that I could think about. And it was all consuming. Where with this running, I am running more, but it's invigorating and it's not as all consuming. Those big marathon workouts, which we can talk about, that I did the last few weeks building in at the peak phase of this build, those are like Fridays are spent getting ready for those, but in a different way, just focusing on making sure you have enough food, making carbs when I say food. So protein stays the same, fiber comes down a little bit, just making sure you're increasing carbs, hydration, electrolytes. That's prepping, but that's throughout the day. And that's, in my daily life, I'm just adding a little more carbs here, making sure I'm drinking here. It's not the training that we're talking about with the CrossFit Games.
Something that I do seem to notice though, as we get closer to races, there are a lot more shoes around the house.
I have a toxic habit. I have a toxic habit, toxic trait. Yeah, that's me.
Well, I'll agree with both those.
So I have this thing where I know you are not supposed to try something new prior to race day, but I did my speed workout in the shoes that I thought I was going to wear. I felt terrible. So what did I do? I got on Google. I started reading every review about every possible marathon shoe, and I ordered 5 pairs and I'm going to try them all on, and I'm going to hit my last long run with some marathon goal pace in them. And then my final tune up Tuesday in whichever pair I decide. I did the exact same thing for the Ultra. I even took 2 pairs out to the Ultra last April, and I literally did not make the decision of which shoe I was wearing until 4 a.m. the morning I woke up, and I just went with my gut instinct.
Which is not recommended.
This is not good advice, but for some reason it works for me. And I like to explore all my options.
Yeah. And I guess this isn't training, but you got your running sessions right now. And then it's also become, I'm going to run over to Nike, or I'm going to run over to Dick's, or I'm going to run back to Dick's, or I'm going to run back to Nike. And you're definitely moving through some shoes right now, and you've got plenty of options. So I'll be curious to see which ones you actually end up running in.
Yeah, I think it's my way of expelling my nervous energy. So I do get nervous, and I just want to make sure that I'm ready. I've got the fuel, I'm ready to go. I've got the plan, but for some reason, shoes always throw me off, and I don't know why. I just see all these different ones, and I love, running shoes are probably one of my favorite things and have always been. I love running shoes. And so I thought I was going to run into Vaporflies, and my calves, it doesn't feel right. So I've had friends run into Alpha Flies. They're like, you have to get the Alpha Flies. I'm like, the Alpha Flies? Okay. So I returned the Vaporflies because Nike had a 60-day return policy. So I got to test them out, took them back, no problems. Amazing. Got the Alpha Flies. But then I do my tempo workouts in the Saucony Endorphin Speed, and I love them. So there's a Saucony Endorphin Pro and a Saucony Endorphin Elite. The Pro is the one a lot of the marathoners run in. So I was like, you know what? I love the Saucony Endorphin Speed. I might as well try on the Pro too. So right now I'm down to determining if I'm the Alpha Fly or the Saucony Endorphin Pro. Those are the two that I'm between. I guess we will find out on race day which one I go with. The other ones will all be returned.
Are you taking 2 shoes out?
I haven't decided that yet. I'm still waiting for one of them to get here. So once they get here, I will walk around the house in them a bunch. Milo will look at me like I'm crazy. I'll kind of, just kind of see like which one feels more comfortable, because I really believe everybody's feet are so different. And I believe that you should like your shoes when you put them on. And this is something I've learned time and time again, is like, I've read every review on the internet about every shoe. And, I've gone with shoes that have amazing reviews, but they don't work for my feet. And so what I've learned is go back to your gut instinct. Like, it should be comfortable when you put it on. We all have different gauges. We run different. Our feet are different. So just making sure that just because it has all of these reviews doesn't mean like that's what makes that decision for you.
Yeah. And I think if it doesn't feel good just walking around or on your training runs, it's definitely not going to feel good on mile 23 when you're pushing yourself really hard.
Yeah. So my last training run will be 12 miles. So that is going to be a pretty good gauge on how are these shoes going to feel. And so whichever ones I wear for that, that's what I will be wearing, as long as all goes smooth. I have a backup pair. I have the pair I wore for the half marathon that are the Nike Vaporflies. And those are the old Vaporflies. So I have quite a few miles on them, which is why I was looking for a newer one. But I do know that I love those for 13 miles. And so I ran the 22-mile workout in them on the runner here, or on our treadmill. And so it's like, I have a safe, secure pair that I know that I can take, yes, those will be coming with me, whatever I decide, but I do have those just in case. So it's like, I have in the back of my head a backup plan, but I still want to kind of explore my options with these other two super shoes, as people call them.
We like to travel pretty light, and I don't think that's going to be the case for this race. We are actually headed on a ski trip, which was planned first prior to this marathon. And Kristi saw this marathon. It kind of lined up better to run this race before rather than after a ski trip. So we're going to be taking our skis, snowboards, and all of our winter gear out to this race, which is probably going to look a little bit abnormal showing up. And then the day after, we're literally headed to go skiing.
Yeah, we're going to show up in the desert with all of our ski gear. But that gives me anxiety in itself, because I'm a terrible packer. I better start packing like 3 days in advance and I'm going to have lists all over the house, because not only am I going to have to pack for the ski trip, I feel like I'm going to get there and be like, Pat, I forgot my mittens or my ski socks, because I'm so focused on what I have for this marathon. I feel like I'm just going to show up and just be like, what in the heck was I thinking when I packed? But yeah, I will not be packing lightly. I'll just go ahead and let you know that now.
I've got a gauge on that already.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that we recognize that ahead of time. But back to kind of the tapering process and, answering some of the questions that you guys have had is the other question. So strength training, yes, we've kept strength training. Tapering is decreasing 3 weeks out. But the other question is nutrition. So what does that look like? And that's also been a little bit of a challenge, because as you're dropping, you don't feel as hungry. And so for me, I listen to my body. I'm not doing a carb load just yet, but I am fueling my body all day long. I love carb loading, but what you don't want to feel is just like really...
Are you saying carbo?
Carbo load?
I think it's just carb loading.
Well, I say carbo like carbohydrate.
All right.
So carbo load. I don't know. What do you guys say? But so not cutting calories, because the volume is decreasing, or not intentionally cutting calories, but keeping things pretty stable. And then the carb loading will start. So if the race is Saturday, then it will be Friday morning. I'll eat normal Friday evening, because I think it's really, really important. So I'm working backwards here. Really important to not overindulge Friday night before the race. We have a story about Patrick doing that on his first half marathon that we'll tell you here in a second. But so carb loading will be Friday morning, normal Friday night. I'll have carbs with dinner. I usually do like spaghetti and meatballs. It's something I've pretty much eaten since like my first ever marathon. And I feel like it always settles really well. Thursday will be a huge carb day. Like that will be one of the bigger days. And then I'll even go Wednesday evening. So it'll be Wednesday evening, Thursday, Friday morning, because what you have to recognize is if you start the day before, it's too late. Like your glycogen stores are not going to be topped off. You need about 72 hours pre-race, 48 at the bare minimum to top off those glycogen stores. And I think that's something that I see a lot of people get wrong, is they don't start until the day before. Patrick, do you want to share your experience with your half marathon?
I'm very well aware of all those things, and I've told that to, I couldn't even tell you how many people. And for the first half marathon that I ran, I just, I got the nervous energy the night before, and I was worried about crashing. So I ate a bunch of food I'm not used to eating, and I ate more than I'm used to eating. So I did not feel very good in the morning, and it took me quite a few miles before it was not just sitting in my stomach. And I had to make a pit stop. And once I did, I felt much better, but that was not a pleasant way to start the race. And for the first 6 or 7 miles, I was not feeling good.
That also brings back the ultra for you when you did the half marathon, which was the opposite problem.
This was not my problem though.
So it's really important to plan nutrition as much as you plan your workouts, and you plan your taper, and you plan your outfit, and you plan your shoes, and you plan your mid-race fueling. To plan, what time are you waking up in the morning? What time do you have to be at the start line? Work backwards. Okay, what time does that mean that I need to eat my breakfast? What am I having for breakfast? All of these little details when you are prepping for a race matter so much. And if you can just plan them ahead, it will take off so much stress for your race day. Well, we had these planned ahead for the ultra, but I accidentally read a detail wrong and told Patrick the wrong start time for his race.
So what time did you take off for your full ultra marathon?
I think I took off at
It was early.
6.
So you took off at 6. I think you told me that my start time was 8.
I did.
And I was, again, in a very supportive role. So I was helping make sure that you were taken care of and ready to go. And I was running, and I'm pretty self-sufficient, so I was taking care of myself. So I got up at maybe 5 with you, made sure you got your food, everything you needed, went over to the start line, got you taken off. And then I went back to our van because we were actually camping like on the site. It was out in the middle of nowhere, which was really cool. So I'm hanging out in the van. I've got, what I think is a couple hours until I go. So I'm just hanging out. It's cold out, so I'm bundled up in the van. And I think I've got 2 hours. And at, 7 o'clock, I hear in the faint distance, like 10 seconds. I'm like, oh, crap. So I open the van door and I hear him just go 3, 2, 1, go. So I had not eaten. I hadn't gone to the bathroom. I hadn't had any water or coffee. And I am just literally throwing on my shoes, grabbing my vest, and running from the field that we were in across the field and then through the start line and just started the race. So I was cursing your name for that start. That was not ideal by any means.
So we want to avoid situations like this when you are prepping for a race. Your heart rate was probably through the roof. There was no easy, smooth, enjoyable start. You just went from 0 to 120.
Yeah, and I started with about a 200-yard sprint across the field and then just right into the start line.
Yeah, you want to set yourself up to succeed on race day, not create havoc and chaos. That's not a good way to be starting that race day.
That was a beautiful race though.
That was really, really fun. If you guys, we did the ultra and the half marathon trail run out in Zion, Utah, and I would definitely go back anytime, any race. I'm actually hoping that we get to, I was just telling you the other day, I'd like to, after I get through this one, start looking into another ultra, maybe bumping that 50K up to a 50 mile.
Yeah, the trail runs are my favorite. I think they're the most enjoyable. They're always in a beautiful place. And yeah, I just think they're super fun.
Also the energy, the atmosphere, and the vibe. So I think if you're like questioning, can I do it? It's always, if you just find a solid training plan, you put the training in, when you get there, the energy is just electric. And it's all of these people that are challenging themselves and doing things that maybe they didn't think were possible. And that is just so invigorating. And it just literally sets my soul on fire. And like, I look forward to that energy that you get to experience at these races.
And I think it also takes a little bit of pressure off, because unless you're running the same race again, like the following year, they're all going to be so different that it's not like whatever your time was when you finished this one, the next one you're trying to beat that time, because the elevation is going to be so different. The ground's going to be different. What you're running on is going to be different. So they're not really comparable. And it takes a little bit of that pressure off in comparison to a marathon where it's like you run that time, you know what it is, and you know that you want to beat it. There's so many more extra variables that it really is more about enjoying the race than it is beating maybe a specific time.
Yeah, I definitely felt that. And that was something I thoroughly enjoyed and loved, even in the training process. The difference in training for that ultra and training for the marathon was the marathon, we had speed sessions built in every single week. So Tuesdays were very hard workouts. And then Saturdays were either long, easy runs or long run workouts, which is newer for this block. And that's what we pulled back after that 3 weeks. For the ultra, it was more about time on feet, understanding proper fueling, and keeping your body going for these extended periods of time running at a slower pace. And that's a whole nother ballgame, is like getting your body to continue working for 4, 6, 8 hours, whatever that is. Mine took around 5.5 hours. And so it's a completely different energy system, and it's a different style of training, but it's enjoyable in itself.
It's so much more about being able to maintain for a longer period of time than it is how fast you are able to run.
Yeah, and strength training plays into that as well. So if you guys are running ultras, maybe you're not doing 3 to 4 days of strength training, but 1 to 2, and keeping the glutes and the hamstrings strong for the climbing, the inclines, the declines. A lot of these are happening on trails where there might be a little bit of elevation gain or loss. You want to make sure that you're staying strong so you can support your body through those uphills and those downhills.
And you've got strong ankles and calves and knees to where when you're stepping on rocks or uneven ground, you're not more likely to get hurt. You're less likely.
Yeah, it really does make a difference. But a couple other questions that I got that I wanted to make sure we answered were, first, I had to do my, 20, 21, and 22 milers? No, just 21 and just 22 on the treadmill. Prior to that, I had only done 16, and that was in Aruba when we were on vacation, which I don't know why I was running 60 miles on vacation in Aruba in a treadmill, but that was something I really enjoyed doing. But doing those 21 and 22 milers,
there's only been a handful of people who have ever said that.
Yeah, I just wanted to before I went to the beach that day. Doing those 21 and 22 milers, the number one question I got was, well, what are you watching? Are you watching a movie? Are you listening to a podcast? What are you doing? For me, I actually do not run with headphones. And I was telling Patrick the other day, when I do run with headphones, the only days I'm either listening to a podcast or a book. And those are the days that I am running so slow that I'm not even thinking about my running. I'm just in the zone, just getting outside. If I am thinking about my running in any way, shape, or form, I'm not listening to anything. And for those 21 and 22 mile workouts, I did have in the background, I had a little bit of noise. It was really, really low just because I didn't want to hear the treadmill sound. I had it set on the Big Booty Mix Spotify, which is just a mashup of a bunch of songs, but not anything to where it was like I was singing or I was listening to those songs, because that actually creates a little bit of chaos in my brain. But the reason I don't listen to anything is I want to be dialed in, thinking about every single mile. Those workouts, I had goals. So for example, it was like 4 miles easy into like 5 miles at goal marathon pace, 1 mile easy, 3 miles at goal marathon pace, and so on. And so for me, what I'm focused on is, what is my goal marathon pace? How is my heart rate? How is my body feeling? How hard am I actually pushing? Am I over pushing this run? Am I going to be able to do this again? And so I'm really dialed in, thinking about listening to the cadence of my feet on the treadmill, or if I'm outside. And so for me, that just makes time fly by. And I'm just in my head, zoned in on exactly what I'm supposed to be focusing on. And that's what I'm going to apply to this race at Mesa.
And I think that more often than not, it's going to be your mind that holds you back more so than your body. So it's just being in tune with where you're at, how you feel, and kind of talk yourself through the hard parts and keep your head in the game to where you don't give yourself the excuse to slow down or get off your paces or anything like that. You can stay locked in and focused.
I couldn't agree with that more. I saw this time again in CrossFit, and with what I'm doing with running, is what happens between your ears is so important. It's as important as the training itself. And I've come home from a couple of runs where I'm like, I just tell myself, like, I'm proud of you for being out here. Like, I'm literally saying this to myself in the head. I'm proud of you for being out here. I'm proud of you for working hard. I'm proud of you for pushing forward, because even if you don't want to, I'm proud of you. And it's whatever you can repeat to yourself that keeps you going. And I had different mantras throughout my career as CrossFit Games. The very first year, I'm going to share this with you guys, Patrick helped me in the gym. I was having a pretty bad session about a week or two before, seems spot on. And he looks at me and he's like, would you rather be in accounting? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think I said, would you rather be sitting at a desk doing, working your accounting job?
And I looked at him and I was like, absolutely not. So my mantra at that CrossFit Games was, this is better than accounting. When things would get really hard on the field or in a workout, I'd be like, this is better than accounting. This is better than accounting. And for some reason, that flipped the switch in my brain. My mantras have shifted since. And I think that's important. And that's something all of you guys can work on, is just being aware of your thoughts. Are your thoughts bringing you down? Because if we're just constantly doubting ourselves and we're having these negative thoughts, it's wild when I have those negative thoughts and I look down at my pace, it will slow down. When I'm positive self-talking to myself and I'm zoned in and I'm like, you got this, you can do this, my pace will increase and I will feel lighter. It will feel easier. And I think one thing without doing any of the physical training that you can work on is being aware of your thoughts and being in tune.
And I think that it's something that people maybe even have a hard time understanding because like it looks appealing to be in the gym all the time. But when you're training for a race like this or for the CrossFit Games especially, the training is beyond enjoyable. Like it is far past like, ooh, this is what I want to do. I want to do my sixth set of back squats at a weight that I'm not sure if I can hit or not. And I'm so tired and so hungry and I'm so sore that, and I know I've got to do, some hard repeats after this that are not going to be fun at paces that I'm really going to have to push at. That that is hard, but to be able to have the perspective of if I was sitting in my office right now and I was, not that there's anything wrong with being in an office, but that wasn't what you wanted. And to put yourself in that position where it's like, that if you were sitting in that office watching the CrossFit Games or a race, you'd be like, I'd give anything just to be training for that. So to not forget those thoughts and be like, the me sitting in the office would be so grateful and would give anything to be in this position right now. So you need to just kind of buckle up and like do the work because you chose to do this.
Yeah. And it's a learned skill. It takes practice and it takes effort and it takes awareness like anything else. It takes consistently being aware. And there were 3 books that I read that really helped me that I would recommend for anyone. They're easy reads. I believe the author's Joshua Metcalf, and I'll have to double check that, but I know the titles of the book. One was Chop Wood, Carry Water. The other was Win in the Dark. And the third is Pound the Stone. Easy reads that just really can give you some perspective, and they really helped me continue to work on that mental game. And I'm constantly, reading books, listening to podcasts, constantly figuring out ways to improve that mental game because there are times that I struggle. And same with this marathon coming up. It's not that I did this training for the race to be easy. The race will not be easy. If I run the race right, it will not be easy. I will be emptying my tank as I approach that finish line, and that will be tough. And I think some of the anxiety and nervousness for some of us comes knowing how hard we really do need to push to get the result that we want, and that it's not going to be comfortable and it's not going to feel good, but we're capable of doing it because our mind gives up before our body. And this is something that I've been working on time and time again. And there are times where I'm struggling with that. And it's just knowing that you put the training in, not so it's going to be easy, but so you can tolerate it and you can really show up for yourself on that race day or on that competition day.
I think nutrition is also something that plays into that a lot. Nutrition and sleep that people can underestimate, because when you're not sleeping well and you're under eating, that mental game gets so much harder. And we've seen that when, you're not maybe feeling quite as good as you normally do and we can bump your calories up, it's all of a sudden like you're a whole new person.
Yeah. How many times has that happened? And it's not even that I realize it. Pat will look at me and be like, okay, so I track my sleep just to keep an eye on it. And I also track my resting heart rate. So for those of you guys that don't know, resting heart rate is a really good indicator of your fitness. If your resting heart rate is sitting lower and then all of a sudden it starts getting higher and higher and higher and you're seeing this big spike, something's probably off. You might be overtraining. You might be really fatigued. You might need a rest day. You might be getting sick. Keeping an eye on that resting heart rate, not the max heart rate. That's a little bit of a different thing, and we can cover that on another podcast. But resting heart rate's a really good gauge on how you're doing, how you're feeling, and if you're overtraining. Nutrition, that one plays right in with that. Is when I'm not eating enough, I'd be waking up multiple times a night to pee. And all of a sudden I increase my carbohydrate intake, and all of a sudden I sleep through the night. And then my mood is more stable. I can focus. I can get work done. I'm more productive. And it's having those barometers and understanding those signs and those symptoms of like, okay, something's off. I shouldn't just be living in this chronic state. Like, what can we adjust, or what do I need to evaluate?
And just to touch on the heart rate thing, because I think that gets confusing for some people, is your max heart rate is going to be much more of a static number, and you can work in percentages or in relative distance from your max heart rate, but you're not going to move your heart rate up the fitter you get. It just kind of is what it is for the most part. But your resting heart rate is something that you can have influence over. And the lower you're able to get that is an indication of your fitness level. And you can also use that as a gauge for how you're recovering. So if your resting heart rate's normally at 40 beats a minute, and then all of a sudden it's maybe now 52 beats a minute, that would be an indicator that maybe you're not recovering very well.
Yes. And that's something that if you guys use these watches or whatever you use, that's something great to track. And that is something that I like to keep an eye on, especially as I head into this taper. And some of those things, like, you have to understand when you do taper, because volume and intensity are decreasing and your training is changing, not everything is going to line up perfectly. And so though we track all of this all the time throughout training as good signs, it's not just immediately gonna be like, oh, I'm tapering my resting heart rate, drop, now I'm ready to peak. That's not typically how it works. Your body's recovering and repairing. And so sometimes I'll even see a little bit of a spike in my resting heart rate before it actually comes down. And so I was a big advocate for taking my watch off the week of the CrossFit Games. So none of those numbers got into my head. And the reason I want to bring this up is because we love all of these metrics for when we're training. But if my watch tells me I'm too tired to run on Saturday, February 8th, I'm not just going to be like, oh, watch says I'm too tired to run on Saturday, February 8th. I guess I better sign up for another one and hope that I'm ready to run that day. So if it gets in your head, either just ignore it, just don't even worry about it, or take it off and don't stress about it, because no matter what, you're showing up to race and you're going to put your best foot forward. And there's a lot of days that I've felt my worst that I've actually gotten the best result.
You just have to learn to compete and to not use those things as excuses or to let them get in your head, especially at the CrossFit Games. Almost nobody, there may be nobody who shows up feeling 100%. And so if you didn't sleep great the night before, or if you didn't get a good meal or something's aching, it's like, okay, well, we're here, like we're still competing. So you just got to put that out of your mind. You're like, you're here to compete. And, there's obviously exceptions to that if you actually get hurt, but you can't just let those things that aren't ideal be excuses to not give it all that you've got.
Yeah. And you worked how long, how many months? And especially for the CrossFit Games, season starts in February. So to get to August and let those things be an excuse as to why you didn't put your best foot forward, no. Can't do that. You've just got to show up for yourself because of all of that hard work that you've put in. And it's going to be similar to when I show up, or if we do another ultra, if we show up for that, if we show up for this Mesa, it's showing up on that day, knowing whatever you have to give today, you're going to give, so you don't walk away and have regret and think, I should have just tried harder. I should have dug a little bit deeper. No, you're going to do that on that race day. And I think that goes into the psychology. And that's a lot of what I'm doing this week, and things that you guys can do building into your races is preparing your mind, understanding you've done the work, but just because you've done the work doesn't mean it's going to be easy. You're going to have to show up and you're going to have to put all that work to use. And so I keep reminding myself of that. It's okay to dig deep. It's okay that it's going to start to hurt. It's okay. And just preparing yourself for when that does happen, that you have something mentally ready to go. It's like, okay, I got this. Here we go. It's starting to burn a little bit, but I can keep my legs turning over, and just being aware of those thoughts. And I think that's really what helps. That helps me dig a little bit deeper.
So we've touched on mindset. We've touched on some preparation. Do you have any tips for the taper?
Tips for the taper. Try to understand, or not try, but understand that you might feel funky. And I think don't look too far into it. And if you do feel funky, you're probably on track. And so I can't tell you there's been a time that I haven't felt funky, because things are changing and your volume, your schedule, it's changing. The other thing I would say is keep your routine. So don't just sit in the house and twiddle your thumbs waiting for that race day to show up and just stressing as much as you can and just only focused on that. Like, try to keep your routine. Continue with your work, continue doing your runs when you're supposed to, continue going to the gym, even if that means you're only foam rolling, activating, using bands, maybe you're not doing as much strength training, keep that routine. The other thing I would say is journaling. I think getting down your thoughts and getting those out of your head, because it can be overwhelming at times because you feel like you've put so much into this. Go ahead, find a journal, write down how you're feeling. And then if you do another race, to be able to look back at that journal, if you're experiencing those same things and it went really well, you can be like, oh yeah, I've been here before.
And I think something people don't give enough credit to is how quickly we can think, and how your thoughts can kind of bounce around in your head all over the place, but you can't write that quickly. So you have to take the time to think through, whatever is bouncing around in your head, and you got to articulate it into something that you can write down on paper. And that really often helps people work through what's either stressing them out or bothering them in a way that is far more beneficial than just letting it kind of ruminate and bounce around in your head.
Yeah. And I've noticed that firsthand for myself. And then the final tip that I would give someone, that has been something that's been very hard for me to learn over these years, and I think you probably have a few things to say on as well, the sun still rises tomorrow. If you don't hit that goal, if you do hit that goal, the sun still rises tomorrow, and you're still that same person, and you don't lose your identity if you didn't hit that goal.
So you've got a goal, and it's fun to chase that goal, and you worked really hard to get there, but the process is what's been the most enjoyable, and the training's what you enjoy most anyway.
You break barriers through that training. You break your beliefs. There's probably workouts that you did during your training that you didn't even know were possible. And so you're just continuing to get stronger and to continuing to challenge and to learn about yourself. And that's, to me, what makes life worth living. And I think it's so much fun just to be able to challenge yourself and see what's possible. And so just kind of remember that, like Patrick's saying, is if you can shift your mindset to not just the race is kind of a little cherry on top to see what grade you've earned after you've studied really hard for a test, but you can shift your mindset to enjoying 99% of the process, which is all the work that you do. It can be a really rewarding experience, and it can keep you continuing to sign up for more things without putting so much undue stress on yourself.
And the goal, I think anyway, is to be able to get out and just do these things, whether it's a marathon or a trail run or a local competition. The goal is to be able to be fit enough to where you can get out, sign up, and do something that you can put your fitness to use, and to continue doing that for a long period of time.
Yeah, and that's been our mission from the start with IBEX Training, with everything that we've ever done, is we don't just train in the gym to be in the gym. We train in the gym so we can do all the other things outside of the gym. And that's something that we've always firmly believed in. We want to be strong. We want to be physically capable. So if somebody's like, hey, let's go do this hike, you can go do that hike. Hey, let's go. Can you help me move? Even though Patrick says, don't ask me to help move, if you guys tuned into one of our other podcasts. It's just that you're physically capable. And I think that in itself is another reason to be training.
Hopefully you guys got some nuggets out of this. We are excited to get Kristi to the actual race. We're excited for the ski trip afterwards. If you guys have any questions, put your comments below. We are going to do a cool little documentary on this as well that you guys will be able to check out. And if you're listening on YouTube, the podcast is also available on Spotify. If you've got other topics you would like for us to cover, put those in the comments below, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.